Amen. Okay, so it's been a little while since we looked into the article that we're looking at on the Constitution and nativism, and we're going to have a bit of PowerPoint today, and that is going to look at everything that we've gone over in the previous study, and just do a bit of a rehash of what the article's looking at. So I'm just going to share screen and do that. Okay, so if we all remember, this is the article that we were looking at. It's not one that has been looked at yet. There was two other articles that Elder Tess went over. This is one by the same author, Jared A. Goldstein, whom we should all be familiar with. Now, just a quick note, with your Zoom, with the PowerPoint, I've tried to have everything to the left. So if you have a little taskbar of Zoom with the videos and whatnot, you can see me. If you put me up the top right of your screen, then you should be able to read all the content that we have that I've got on the PowerPoint, and the Zoom little tab won't obstruct anything, perhaps apart from this slide, but hopefully that helps as we go through. So it's entitled "Unfit for the Constitution: Nativism and the Constitution from the Founding Fathers to Donald Trump." So firstly, we went over what exactly nativism is, and if we can recall, it's the intense opposition to an internal minority on the grounds of its allegedly un-American characteristics. So So it has, we won't go through all of this. We'll just do a quick sort of brush over it, because there's a lot of content just in even just the last study we did. But we'll just do a quick going over. And I think we can do that by almost this slide, which has, I'll just go back one. This is the abstract, so it's just the introduction to the introduction almost of this article by Jared A. Goldstein, and it introduces all the topics that he's going to highlight, and we can recognize that just from this first portion, the repeating and enlarging of the patterns that are seen in this history with our topics. So we have, go to the next one, in the 1840s with the Know Nothing Party, which believed that Irish Catholics who were coming into the United States, there was a lot of them at the time, they were incompatible with the Constitution or incompatible with being American. So therefore they weren't, they were considered or weren't considered to be American. And as we progressed in our study, we could see how this same mindset, just more or less copy and pasted to some degree, to the next dispensation, to the next history, and it manifested itself in the Chinese Exclusion Act. So the Chinese who were coming to America were considered to be too foreign. So first of all, Irish Catholics were incompatible. And then as time went on, 40 odd years later, the new set of immigrants to the United States that were seen as a threat were the Chinese, and they were considered too foreign to be worthy of American citizenship. And then we had, later on in 1924, the National Origins Act, which considered only those of the Nordic race, which we did go into. We'll just touch on it again as we skim through last study's slides. So we can even just see here in just a repeating and enlarging here as we go through the histories from the 1840s to 1882 and to 1924. We just see the same thing happening, but it's just in a different form. And so that gives, when we place them like this, we can see how they compare with each other, how they're different, and how they're the same. We broke down the abstract last time, so we won't do that now. But the whole article, we have so last time we just looked at the introduction as a whole. We didn't get into the main body of the whole article. So today we're just going to do our little review, and then we're going to get into just part one of this article. Now, just to reiterate, this is not an article that has been done. Elder Tess hasn't done it. Hasn't been done a study on this article as yet. So this is not to be confused with Jared Goldstein's other article that Elder Tess has already been through, that we all looked at already. So this is a different article, and it's on nativism in the United States, just as a reminder, so everyone knows we're on the same page. Okay, so there's three parts to this article. And as I said, we're just going to be looking at part one. And we'll get there in a moment. So the introduction to this article was this article tells a story of an idea, and this idea is one that's been around for a while, and it's a nativist idea, and it's the thought that only certain people can become or are American, and that anyone from another race should be, we should treat them with suspicion and some would say harbour hostility to them because they threaten our way of life in the things that they bring from the country they come from, their religion, their customs, whatnot. And as time progressed, as we looked at in that previous slide, the idea of what constituted to be an American, remained more or less it wasn't applicable. It seemed to be applicable to people that were coming from, first of all, like we saw, Irish Catholics, then we had Chinese, and it was considered that only Anglo-Saxon, Nordic or European or white people were considered to be authentically American or real American. So anyone from anywhere else that looked different, had a different skin color, were excluded from being considered American. So we have different names throughout history for those included and excluded. So for instance, the Constitution, as I just said, was made for white people or Anglo-Saxons, or real Americans or 100% Americans. And it was unfit for people of other cultures or other countries that were visibly different. For instance, Chinese people, Negroes, Italians, Jews, and of the like. So it was considered that the Constitution was not made for those people from those sort of areas, and that they would undermine the nation's values. So we won't read too much of this because there's a lot of words here, but as I mentioned earlier, the Nordic race was attributed to people such as the origins were from Anglo-Saxon, Germanic people, Baltic Finns, etc., etc. I think the next slide has a bit more. Yeah, so this is the one I wanted. So Nordicism is an ideology of racism which views the Nordic race as superior. And this is a book by a person called Madison Grant on the great race being that Nordic race. I think we'll come back to this quote by Franklin Roosevelt a bit later in our study. That comes up again. So we'll go over that in a little bit, but essentially what he's saying is that being American is just what's in your mind, what's in your heart, not necessarily where you're from. But we'll go into this a little bit further in our study. Okay, so this is a good point here that we touched on last time, the conventional understanding of American nationalism. So it's a shared devotion to a common creed of liberty, equality, and democracy, a creed expressed in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So if you, this conventional understanding is where you have a belief in a common creed that a country espouses. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, opposed to being I was born in America, therefore I'm American. And anyone else that wasn't born here isn't as American as I am. So it's more about the things the values you have and the beliefs you espouse, to liberty and democracy and equality, opposed to where you're from, whether your origins are from a white background, you would be considered more American when looking at it from a nativist perspective. So we'll keep moving through. Okay, yeah. So we just did the introduction last time, and that brought us to this part one. And basically, he seems to like long titles, not only for his article, but also for his chapters. So this part is called The Central Role of the Constitution in Conventional Conceptions of American Nationalism. Now, if you're anything like me, I needed to sit down and think about what that actually means. So what the title is basically saying, it's describing how you read the Constitution will therefore give you an understanding of what it means to be American. So how we read the Constitution is then how we view American nationalism. So we see in this part one, Mr. Goldstein begins by just highlighting what the framework for understanding what is distinctive about nativist invocations of the Constitution. So when you think of nativism and nativist movements, he points out in this article that often, but erroneously, they're described as embracing American nationalism in which race and religion are seen as the core of what it actually means to be American, or your national identity, rather than the things you believe, the beliefs of equality, of life and liberty and happiness. So he then contrasts that and says, yeah, in fact, their belief is that only those from a certain race, ethnicity, or religion are capable of embracing that creed. So we've got the idea that being American is about where you're from, or your religion, or your ethnicity, rather than the values and your core beliefs of freedom and those sorts of things. So instead of holding to a common set of ideals that makes you, that entitles you to be an American, you not only have to be from a certain race to then be considered American, but you are only considered capable of having those set of ideals if you are from a certain race or religion or ethnicity. So if you are, and that's what these nativist movements believe when you boil it down. Not only are they exclusive, but they're demeaning those that are not from their background, not from their race or ethnic background. They are because they're not from a white Anglo-Saxon origin, therefore they're not capable of embracing the things that are espoused in the Constitution of life and liberty and happiness and freedom for everyone. So it's not just that, say someone from Africa comes to America, they are not only not considered to be American, but they can't even be, they're not capable, they're not able to embrace the creed that or the common set of ideals that Americans have because of their origin. So it's incredibly racist. It's incredibly demeaning and quite horrible, to be honest, way of thinking. As you go through this article, in this part one, Mr. Goldstein then highlights, illustrates the two types of nationalist movements. So we have civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. Now, civic nationalism, so this is nations exhibiting civic nationalism identify membership by commitment to the nation's political creed. So anyone can be part of this nation, despite their race, gender, ethnicity, sex, religion, place of birth. It's made up of people that share the same beliefs. So it sounds very similar, in fact, to the movement. We don't discriminate anyone being part of the movement, but we have a devotion to a set of not political ideologies, but we'd probably say religious ideologies. And for instance, the vows, we all espouse those, and that's our collective, it's our shared devotion, and that's how we are part of the movement. We profess those vows, we're part of the movement, be baptized, etc. And then when we come to ethnic nationalism, this is where members of the community share a common background, whether that for racial background or religious background or ethnic background. So you can only be part of that race if you're from a certain nation or origin. And obviously we contrast that with civic nationalism. Civic nationalism, it's almost like there's two streams happening, almost. You've got one sort is good, one sort is bad, but obviously now we remember that things were easier not long ago when we just had two streams, you know, Fox News or CNN. Well, we watch CNN, we're right. But now we know that even the left has things wrong. And so I won't go and say that civic nationalism is the way we should go, but I can certainly see that when I compare that with us in the movement and how one becomes a member, I can certainly see that we're certainly not, we don't have ethnic nationalism when it comes to joining the movement. You know, anyone can join, as long as you believe, we espouse the beliefs that we do. So we will move on to the next portion. And Goldstein then looks at, sees it important to just articulate what the difference between citizenship and national identity. So citizenship is the formal designation of persons with political rights and responsibilities. And when we compare that to national identity, it's the often unwritten convictions that members of a nation have about what it means to be a legitimate member of that community. So he's then going to quote from a gentleman called, his name is Benedict Anderson. And he wrote this book called here we are. He wrote this book here, Imagine Communities. And he was, he did this in 1983. And he was an Anglo-Irish political scientist. And he's best known for writing this book, The Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism. So I've made these fonts a little bit bigger, so I hope you can read them a bit easier, but I'll read them nonetheless. Although citizenship and national identity have some relationship, two concepts are distinct because, as Benedict Anderson has usefully described, nations are imagined communities. Imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion. So in essence, a community of people are not always known to each other. And this is what this gentleman's saying, Mr. Anderson, in his book, Imagine Communities. So as all of you are very aware, you know, I don't know everyone in Western Australia. I don't know everyone in Queensland. I don't know every Australian in Tasmania. But we're still all Australian. We have this sense of we're still a community. And so despite the fact that we don't know every single individual in the country or whatever country you're in, you're still part of that country. So even though I don't know everyone in the ministry from Europe or Africa, we still consider and still are part of the movement. So this is what Benedict Anderson's just describing, this imagined community that we have. It's imagined because we don't know everyone, but it is in fact still reality. Obviously, if we got everyone from the ministry and put them in one spot and, you know, everyone met everyone, then it would, you know, it would be quite reality because you'd be able to meet everyone. So this is sort of what he's saying. Despite the fact you don't know everyone, you're still part of that group. Continuing on, Goldstein writes this statement: members of a nation carry within their imaginations notions of what defines the community and what binds it together. So we all have an understanding of what it means to be Australian, what it means to be a citizen of Earth, what it means to be a citizen of heaven, and because we all have the same creed, we all believe in the same thing, where that's what gives us our sense of community. Despite the fact we haven't come in contact with everyone in the movement, for instance, we're still, because of our beliefs, that's what gives us our sense of community and what binds us together. So with this point in mind, we can certainly see how over time, the continued attack from the religious right has affected the United States and the population's belief in what their national identity is. And certainly we can see this is from, I'm trying to remember when this board work is from, but we can sort it out later if you want to know where this is from. But we can see over time how the religious right have started with one, we can see this thread going along here throughout history all the way to our day, where they've had, for instance, the National Reform Movement and In God We Trust phrase, and under God being put in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then later on, In God We Trust being put on every piece of currency. And so it, even though it may seem just like a drop in the ocean, you know, down here at the beginning, it's building and building. And as this is going along, we've got one generation happening and another new generation coming along, and they're born into this In God We Trust environment, and it becomes normalized. And then we can see how the religious right have continually put these, you can see the progressive joining of church and state throughout history. So even though this has taken a long time to build up, like fake news, it spreads quickly. And it's very damaging and is hard to undo, because now we get down to our day and we've got, for instance, you know, we had Obama here and began to bring back some equality, or institute equality. But once we get to Trump, that's all being undone again. And we see how far it's come in such, it's accelerating as time goes on. So a short amount of time, as we know, the last 4 years of President Trump, a lot of things were going on. For instance, you know, the wall is building up. That was originating, that was very racist, and is still quite affected a lot of people in a negative way, and we know how bad that was. And it was from that fear of the religious right that there's murderers and terrible sorts of people coming over the border, which brings us back to that ethnic nationalism and racism, that if you're not from a certain part, or if you don't look American, then you can't be American. You can't you don't have the capacity to believe the Constitution and what it actually means. But we'll look at the Constitution in a little bit later. That's coming up soon, so I won't talk too much about that yet. But yeah, we can see the progressive nature of what the religious right has done over time and where that brings us to today. So getting back to our article, Goldstein then leads us to give some examples of from some scholars and presidents, etc., talking about civic nationalism. So President Obama expressed the common conception of American national identity when he said that, now this was in his 2013 inaugural address. What binds this nation together is not the colours of our skin or the tenets of our faith or the origins of our names. So he's saying what binds us together is not ethnic nationalism. What makes us exceptional, what makes us American, is our allegiance to an idea. So we have President Obama here. He is pointing out that the United States is not an ethnic nation, but it's a civic nation. So if you believe the creed of the nation in equality and freedom and whatnot, then you're entitled to be an American. Obviously, if you do all the citizenship things and whatnot, but you don't have to be from a certain background or race to be American. And so lots of people agree that American nationalism isn't ethnic, but civic. However, this is a frequently contested concept. And we know this from early this year. Not everyone agreed with Obama. Not everyone, while Obama has been gone for some time, the principles that he was espousing, people didn't agree with that. And we remember this on early this year in January, when President Biden was to be sworn in, whatnot. I believe that was later, but they were affirming his election win from 2020 in January, and we had what happened on January 6th. And we all remember January 6th as quite a considerable day. Lots of things happened that day, and there was, obviously, as we all remember, call them protesters, but it was more or less a domestic terrorist attack. But as we can see in these photos, that these people didn't agree with America being a civic nation, given the principles that they were putting forth were ones that had been put forth by some time, not only by Trump, but he was sort of the chief, the straw that broke the camel's back. And this is where we get a lot of this ethnic nationalism coming up, and Trump was able to stir that up and use it to his advantage. And we see here people storming the capital of the US in Washington, DC. And I remember where I was when this happened. It was quite confronting, almost like when September 11 happened. A lot of us would remember if we were around then, a lot of us would remember where we were. It was quite a confronting, and yeah, it was very, I won't say surprising, but it was very emotional for lots of people that day. And to think that people actually made it into the chambers and whatnot and threatened even those that were on their own, even Republicans. So we have this civic nationalism that not only President Obama's was highlighting, that that is what makes America, is their set of beliefs. Not everyone agreed with that, as we just saw. And then Goldstein, in his article, goes into, uses another example, another expert, and the next one he uses is from this gentleman called Gunnar Myrdal. And he was a Swedish economist and sociologist, and he's best known in the United States for his study of race relations, which culminated in his book, An American Dilemma: The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy. And the interesting thing is his study was influential in the 1954 landmark US Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education. So now this is a question for everyone, and you're welcome to unmute yourself. And I don't have the chat open, so actually I might, but you can answer in the chat if you like. What was, just give me a brief summary of what was Brown versus Board of Education. What was happening? What did that involve?
The right for people of colour to be educated equally alongside whites. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'll zoom in a bit here because I've got this board work from one of Elder Tessa's studies. So I'll just zoom that in for us. So yeah, it was basically, there was a group of families, and at the time they weren't allowed to send their children to be educated at a white college or a white university, white school. So they firstly took their local government to court over it, which they lost that case. Now, does anyone know why they lost that case? That first case with their local government?
No.
So because it was law that they were equal but separate. So they still had their segregation laws. So that's why at the local level, they were, the case was dismissed, but the families took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, this is a violation of the Constitution. So that dismissal from the local court, that was overturned and by the Supreme Court, and said, no, you are right. You do have the right to send your children to a white school. where the education is of a higher level. So ultimately, any black family who wanted to send their children were able to send them anywhere they wanted, opposed to, because when we look back in this history, we have, so we can see the progression of we had slavery first, and obviously the blacks in America were considered, they weren't considered of equal value as whites. And then we got 1863 when slavery was abolished, but not long after that, they had the, in the 1890s, it was, I think it began in Louisiana, the Separate Car Act. So like on a train or something, it was decreed that rail companies had to have one car for whites and one car for blacks, so they couldn't be intermingled. So you've got that segregation happening. Not only that, but there was that started in Louisiana, I believe, and then it spread throughout the country, where they had separate doors, separate hospitals, separate drinking fountains, and separate schools, and separate train cars. So that law continued all the way up to when Brown versus Board of Education, when those families first filed their lawsuit, and the reason they lost was because of that equal but separate law. So because it was law that they are to be segregated, therefore they can't send their black children to a school with a white school. So this man's, so that's where this man Gunnar Myrdal's his book here, An American Dilemma, had quite an influence upon the Supreme Court, and ultimately their decision in Brown versus Board of Education. So Goldstein brings this quotes from this guy, just a small portion, where he says, Americans of all nations, origins, classes, regions, creeds, and colours have something in common: a social ethos, a political creed. It is difficult to avoid the judgment that this American creed is the cement in the structure of this great and disparate nation. So it sort of sounds similar to what it's kind of a repeat and enlarge almost of what Obama was saying, just in a different way, that it doesn't matter the color of our skin or our faith. What makes us different, what makes us American, is that we have an allegiance, Obama said, to an idea, but Myrdal says to a political creed, or this American creed. So then Goldstein's going to bring this guy in. He's going to mention this man, Hans Kohn. Now, he's not to be confused with Roy Cohn with a C, who was one of Trump's mentors. Totally different guy. If you could put, this guy's a good guy compared to Trump's Cohn. So the New York Times said he was a historian renowned for analysing the bitter seeds of modern nationalism. And he published a book in 1957, and it's entitled American Nationalism. And this is what Goldstein's going to quote from. So we'll go to the next slide. And Cohn writes that the United States was not founded on the common attributes of nationhood, language, cultural tradition, historical territory, or common descent, but on an idea which singled out the new nation among the nations of the earth. So when we break that down, we can see that Mr. Cohn is saying that America is not based on ethnic nationalism. So we see this portion here where he says language, cultural tradition, historical territory, or common descent. So it's not where you're from that makes you part of the nation, but it's that you have this idea, this common creed. So Goldstein has been, he brought all this evidence from these presidents and political scientists, etc. And he's putting forth that America is, in fact, a civic nation, comparing that with ethnic nationalism. So first describing what each is and then giving evidence that America is a civic nation, so built upon fundamental values. And those values are, where do they get those values? They are from the Constitution. And this is where he begins to talk about constitutional nationalism. So the nation's civic ideas basically come from, or they're understood to come from, the Constitution. So Mr. Cohn writes that the American Constitution represents the lifeblood of the American nation, its supreme symbol and manifestation. It is so intimately welded with the national existence itself that the two have become inseparable. So you can't, what he's saying is you can't have America without the Constitution, and you can't have the Constitution without America. So they're two have been welded together, so they're not going to come apart. And America is the lifeblood of the Constitution is the lifeblood of the nation. So without that, obviously a nation wouldn't survive. Just like if we didn't have blood, we wouldn't survive. So national, and also the Constitution and national existence. Yeah, so America wouldn't exist if the Constitution was tossed. Okay. Now Goldstein quotes some other people as well, but for time we can't go into every single person because he's got a number of them. But I've just taken a few of the points that they make from what he quotes from them. So he's quoting some legal scholars here, and he highlights what defines American identity, what these people believe defines American identity, and that being a commitment to constitutional ideals. So one bloke said it's the Constitution is the nation's beating heart. and that another person said that the Constitution is the focal point of American exceptionalism. It's their holy of holies, or their Ark of the Covenant of the New Israel. So it's something that's very, very significant. And this, he points out that this is being espoused by not only people on the left, but also people on the right. And then he also brings in another president, President George Bush, and he declared in his first inaugural address that being American, has never been united. America has never been united by blood or birth or soil. We are bound by ideals that move us beyond backgrounds, lift us above our interests, and teach us what it means to be citizens. And so we can see that as we look at from the first personality quotes, so President Obama, we can see that they're saying the same thing, just in a different way. So it's repeating and enlarging, and describing what it means to be American in a different way. So, and the Constitution being the lifeblood, or the Constitution being I think it was the beating heart of the nation. And what he then goes into is, we sort of spoke about this when we looked at that board work of the religious right having, over time, certain things which seem insignificant but build up, and as they progress, Pledge of Allegiance gets changed, in God we trust, on coins, and then it has to be printed on all government vehicles and in schools and government buildings and whatnot. We can see how it's building and building to create this idea that America is a Christian nation, and this is something that's just becomes a normal routine. And he quotes this man Michael Billing, and he calls it banal nationalism. So the daily and often unnoticed reminders that instill national identity. A distilled version of the American creed is invoked every day by millions of school children who pledge allegiance to the Republic and its constitutional ideals: one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So banal meaning lacking originality or freshness, something that you just over and over. So you can imagine the kids at school, they get to school and they, oh yeah, we've got to do our Pledge of Allegiance. It just becomes something that, almost remote, robotic, So it loses its significance, but it becomes so normal that when they inserted in God we trust, when they inserted under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, even just those two words have had a profound impact just on normalizing that the country is supposedly a Christian nation. So this banal nationalism, the daily and often unnoticed reminders that instill national identity, and it's like a dripping tap almost, it keeps happening, and then it builds up to something, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh yeah, we're a Christian nation, that sort of thing. We know from sporting events, Super Bowl, and lots of swearing in of officials, mayors and presidents and whatnot, that it's very routine that they quote the Pledge of Allegiance. And so there's that constant reminder to people of their national identity. And this is what this Michael Billing is calling banal nationalism. It's sort of just the repetition deepens the impression, I guess. And ultimately then people believe it. So yeah, so here we go. This is what I wanted to look at. So we have this is from the study on In God We Trust, and we first had the Pledge of Allegiance in public schools. I think it was in 1892, and so that's happened a long time before Under God is inserted into the pledge, but everyone's already used to that pledge, so it's only a little addition. And over time, now if you try to take it out, there'd be quite the uproar, because it's so normal to everyone. Definitely from the right wing, the right side of politics, there'd be lots of people that would be very happy from the left wing if it was taken out. But you can certainly see the progression of it happening, and that's what's important that we do. We just trace as we do with when we use our parallel methodology. When we open scripture, we use that also on when we're looking at history. So that's what we're doing here. We're looking at throughout history, this civic nationalism, this ethnic nationalism, how it's building, how the differences between the two, how one's coming up, and we can see, get the overall picture, and it just makes it, we get more out of it. We get to learn more by using our methodology and comparing and contrasting between these two types of nationalism. So as we looked at, I think it was, the Constitution being the nation's beating heart. This is where constitutional nationalism comes in, and this is what Goldstein begins to talk about. And it's probably a little bit small for some of you, but I'll read. I'll read this portion of it. So we've just read. We've just been talking about how I think George Bush was mentioning this America not being united by where people are from, but by their ideals, the ideals that everyone collectively has, and that's what makes them a citizen of America. And not only people inside America believe that to be the case, but also people from outside. So this is what Goldstein then highlights. He's talking about outsiders also believe that national identity in the United States arises out of shared values expressed in the nation's constitution. And so one a German philosopher from the EU, calls this constitutional patriotism. And then basically asserting that what the US is doing, their model could be integrated in Europe, and would be a good thing if they dedicate to a set of principles enshrined in a Europe-wide constitution. So Goldstein talks about this constitutional nationalism, certainly compared to ethnic nationalism. It provides a comforting and even inspiring ideal of national identity, because it's very inclusive, not exclusive like ethnic nationalism. So where ethnic nationalism can, well, as he states here, instead of violent, sectarian, tribal, or other forms of nationalism, constitutional nationalism teaches that being American means being committed to universal ideals like individual liberty and human equality. So we contrast that with the ethnic nationalism, which says that you can only be American if you're from a certain race or part of the globe. Okay, so American political leaders and scholars frequently assert that constitutional nationalism has formed the basis for American national identity from the nation's founding. So basically, when we go even just back to his title of this part, where is it? Here it is. So the central role of the Constitution in conventional conceptions of American nationalism. So it's how you read the Constitution is the important point I'd like to make, that it's how you read it then will ultimately give you how you view American national identity. So Goldstein highlights, or is talking about here, that most political leaders and scholars say that it's the Constitution that shows what it means, or states what it means to be American. And for instance, this is, I think we had this quote a bit earlier, but we didn't go over it. When Franklin Roosevelt declared that a good American is one who is loyal to this country and to our creed of liberty and democracy. He claimed that is how it has always been. So what's interesting, and we probably won't get there for time today, but we have all these politicians and legal scholars and whatnot espousing how America is a civic nation and that everyone agrees on a creed of liberty and democracy, and Roosevelt stating here how that's how it's always been. Goldstein then highlights an American historian by the name of Roger Smith, who disagrees with Roosevelt here. And basically what he's saying, we'll probably go into this a bit further next time, but he challenges the belief that it's always been that way in America. It's always been that Americans are American because of the things they believe in that creed of liberty and freedom and equality. But Roger Smith says that that's not actually true, based upon several things through American history. So we'll read this portion and then we'll just rehash what we've been over and continue in our next study. If the conventional understanding were correct that American nationalism is based on commitment to the American creed, Smith argues then episodes in American history that conflict with the creed, slavery and segregation, the conquest of Native American peoples, the denial of women's suffrage, Chinese Exclusion Act, and Japanese internment, to name a few prominent examples, must be seen as mere aberrations, mistakes, when the nation diverged from its true identity. So what he's saying is, if you look back at the beginning of America, when they were founded, if indeed to be American meant to believe in liberty and equality and all these things, then why were, well, please explain the slavery and segregation in American history. Please explain the denial of women's suffrage, the Chinese Exclusion Act, all these terribly racist and sexist things that have occurred doesn't match up with, oh yeah, we've always been in belief of a creed and equality and freedom and whatnot. So this is where Smith is challenging that. And Goldstein's highlighting this to sort of give a better understanding and help us to, so he's quoted all these people that are believe America's not an ethnic nation, but a civic nation. And so then he's got this guy, Roger Smith, talking about how, well, disagreeing with Roosevelt. And it's kind of very true, because if they've obviously it's been a progressive increase of understanding, I suppose. Obviously back when even Abraham Lincoln, you know, everyone attributes him with freeing the slaves, but he did it because he had to, not necessarily because he was the one leading the charge for freeing the slaves. So it's kind of a lots of people think of that these things have been around for some time, but that doesn't add up with things that have happened in American history, which is what this guy's pointing out. So essentially, we have this this part one, which is not that long, but there's a lot in there in this part one. So we're over halfway on part one, and there's quite a lot of information that Goldstein puts in all of these articles in this particular article, though it is, I believe, one of his shorter articles. It's quite interesting, certainly I found, to learn of the two types of nationalism and looking at those and comparing those with one another and seeing how we have those in our own experience. So, and being part of the movement, like we spoke about, it's not an exclusive thing, and it's the same externally with nations. We also spoke about not everyone agrees that America is a civic nation. They want to go back to a time when, for instance, like we had they had with the Irish Catholics in 1840s, and the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese being too foreign. Nowadays, it would be they don't want to allow any Muslims into America, or Mexicans, for instance, and it's just the same thing happening over, but it's just given a different. It manifests itself in a different way. So it's like when it's almost as if the racism is it's so visible, and there's so much outrage in the community that it then gets, okay, well, we'll stop doing that now, but it just changes its form and then comes up again until it's sort of someone's like, hey, that's the same as this, you shouldn't be doing that. So it's interesting to see the patterns that have happened in the past, and it's just the same thing happening again in a different way. And that's why it's so important to look at these histories, to look at the different things that have happened, the progression of racism, of nativism, and we can also see sexism as well with that too. You can run those and see those on the same line, but obviously we're just looking at more to do with nativism, which is racism and whatnot. So what we will do is we've still got a fair way to go with this whole article, but I didn't want to rush through it. I just wanted to go through methodically and pick apart the main points that Goldstein was highlighting. And it's easy to rush through the whole thing, but we want to, like when we read anything, we want to understand it. There's no prizes for who gets to the conclusion first. So I'm probably volunteering myself for another presentation here, but anyway. So yeah, it's good to go through it slowly and methodically and understand the concepts that Goldstein's highlighting and showing us. So next time we will finish off part 1 and we'll begin part 2. And as you might be able to see, but the part 2 is entitled "Who is Fit for the Constitution? The Long History of the Nativist Argument that Unwanted Foreigners are Hostile to the Constitution." So he's really looking at how foreigners are viewed as a threat to the Constitution because of the the things that they bring, their culture and their religion and whatnot. Now, this article, it is available to read. If anyone wants it, we can forward it to you. It's only 72 pages, but you're most welcome to read ahead. And I think with that, we will close in prayer. If you'll kneel with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to study with one another and go over this document. Lord, as we look at the history of America, how it was formed and things that have occurred since its founding, we understand the patterns that have occurred, and we want to recognize how things have changed, but also how things have remained the same. How parts of history occur, whether it be slavery and segregation, the pattern is reoccurring, but the manifestation of it is just slightly different. And so we ask for the discernment to recognize these things as we look in history and as we have an overview of America as a nation. Lord, may we be guided by the right methodology, that being parable methodology, to grant us the glasses to see the things that have happened and how they are occurring even to this day, though they be in a different form. Lord, give us the eyes to see and the ears to hear as we open our hearts to the study of your word on this blessed Sabbath. We thank you for the technology that we have, that we can come together despite our geographical separation. We thank you for the wondrous truths that you bestow upon us and the ability through parable teaching that you give us to unlock the treasures that are in not only your inspired word, but also in history. May we recognize the importance and the significance of understanding our history, not only of our present day, but also things that have happened in the past, so that we can better discern the things that are to come. We thank you for the blessings of the Sabbath and all that it brings, and we ask that you may continue to guide us and direct us. Be with Elder Terry as she does her study, and we ask a special pouring out of your Holy Spirit upon her and upon each one of us as we continue this Sabbath. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.